Tales from the Treehouse.
Hello, I'm Ben from Treehouse Theatre. I'm going to tell you a story, an old story, a myth or legend. These stories have been with us for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. There are stories like them in every society and every ancient civilization that the world has ever seen. They often tell us things about how people understood the world or how it comes to be how it is. And even if the stories aren't true in a literal way, they always tell us something about what people are like or what life is for. So relax, shut your eyes, and enjoy the pictures of the story coming into your mind. Here we go. This is a story told by the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings. It's called Beowulf and Grendel. Beowulf was king of the Geats, a tribe that lived on the northern shores of somewhere probably around northern Germany today. And Beowulf had an old family friend, someone called Hrothgar, who was king of the Danes, or the Scyldings as they were called back then. Now Hrothgar had reigned very well and peacefully, being a good and generous king for his people for many years, and his hall, which was called Heorot, was a fine and beautiful place. Yes, a great hall, but something more like a palace, full of light and love and laughter, a true tribute to everything that king had brought to his people over his years in charge. But nearby, in the swamp, deep under the waters of a lake, there was a cave. And in that cave lived two ogres. One, an old, smaller female ogre, and the other, her son, a huge and terrible ogre, whose name was Grendel. They say that he was a descendant of Cain, the evil brother of Abel, the two sons of Adam and Eve, the one that killed his brother out of jealousy. All his descendants were cursed, and certainly Grendel was. As he heard the laughter and saw the light coming from the great hall of Heorot, he felt such a deep and terrible envy that he wished death on everyone who lived there. And finally, he could bear it no longer. He swam up from his cave and thudded and squelched across the marsh towards the great hall. The skies were dark and glowering over him, and he muttered curses under his breath as the light from the great hall blinded his eyes when he got nearer. Suddenly he crashed the great doors open and, roaring, stepped into the great hall. The men looked terrified, tried to attack him with swords, but they bounced harmlessly off his flesh, which had a magic charm that prevented any harm coming to him from the iron of men. 30 warriors were torn apart and eaten that first occasion, before he stomped back to his lair, taking some of the dead with him to eat later. And for the next 12 years he terrorized that place. They could not use the hall, the light was gone, the laughter was gone, and poor King Hrothgar could only weep over what was lost and hope that something would come to save them. And that something, when he heard about it, was the young Beowulf, the king of the Geats, a great and mighty warrior whose grip had the strength of 30 men. Gathering a war band of warriors around him, he set off across the sea and found himself in the land of the Scyldings, making his way to Hrothgar. "We will sleep tonight in the great hall and tempt the Grendel from its lair," said Beowulf. "Come, be brave warriors." And so that night they made merry, but they drank only water so they would keep their wits about them. And Beowulf, at the end of the night, lay down to sleep near the door. Sure enough, not long after the men had started to bed down for the night, the doors crashed open and Grendel came in roaring. He seized the nearest Scylding, grabbed him with a great claw and tore his body apart. Beowulf saw how Grendel had done this and put himself in the way to be the next one that Grendel would grab. And as Grendel tried to grasp Beowulf, the great warrior seized his arm with a mighty grip that Grendel could not break. He twisted Grendel's arm around the back of his body, forcing the creature to the ground. Placing a foot on Grendel's face and pushing it into the ground, he continued to twist and grind the arm back and away, and finally the muscles of its shoulder started to tear away from his neck. and with a great wrench, Grendel's arm was torn from his body. Hot acid blood spurted into the air. Grendel screamed with pain and ran back across the marsh to his home in the lake, surely to die there, for his wound was a mortal one. Beowulf held the whole arm and shoulder of Grendel aloft. The men of the great hall cheered, and Beowulf's grisly trophy, the arm and shoulder, was nailed to a place on the wall above the door as a symbol of triumph. And the feasting resumed from that day forwards. Grendel did not return, for indeed he was dead. A few nights later, at the end of the feasting, Beowulf was sleeping in a separate place, a place of honour after his victory. The rest of his men and many of the Danes were sleeping in Heorot itself, when, as they were sleeping, suddenly the great hall's doors were crashed open once more as Grendel's mother, the other ogre, desperate for revenge, burst into the great hall, seized one of Beowulf's best friends and trusted warriors, tore him limb from limb, and ran back to the swamp. Imagine the anguish of the Geats, who, thinking they'd won the day, suddenly lost one of their friends. So, the warriors decided to go to the lair of Grendel's mother itself. And across the marshes they went, with Hrothgar and some of his warriors too, until they reached the lake where Grendel's mother was said to live. Standing by the edge of the water, a man who felt that Beowulf had been a great lord to him, lent him his family's sword, a special weapon, and after receiving blessings from Hrothgar, he jumped into the water and sank into its green and murky depths. As he sank, he felt the tentacles of creatures reaching out to try and grab him and drown him in the water, unable to free himself as things clung to his arms and his legs. And then a great hand seized him about the waist and dragged him deeper into the darkness, finally pulling him into a cave that was like a haven of dry land underneath the water, an air pocket, if you like, underneath the rock. He was thrown onto the ground and looked up to see Grendel's mother standing above him. She looked somewhat like Grendel, with his terrible red eyes and slathering slimy jaws, but more withered, like a monstrous naked green witch. She sat astride him and put her claws around his neck, tried to squeeze the life out of him. Beowulf took the sword that had been given to him by his friend and tried to stab her with it, but it didn't work against her skin, just as the warriors had had the same problem with Grendel himself. But on the wall, Beowulf noticed an enormous sword that seemed to glow with a bluish light. It was a sword big enough to kill giants themselves. With a mighty effort, he flung Grendel's mother from himself onto the cavern floor, jumped up, grabbed the mighty sword from the wall and swung it at Grendel's mother's neck. It effortlessly parted her monstrous head from her shoulders, and she fell dead on the ground. Beowulf breathed a huge sigh of relief and searched about the cavern. Deep within its bowels he found the corpse of Grendel himself, where he had bled to death after his encounter with Beowulf. To prove that Grendel was indeed dead, he cut off Grendel's head too with the giant-killing sword, and as soon as he did so, the hot acid blood from within burnt the sword, completely dissolving it until only the hilt was left in Beowulf's hand. And taking Grendel's head and the hilt of the mighty sword, Beowulf went back out into the water and swam back to the surface to show the Danes and his own warriors that the deed was over. Of course the men cheered, and Hrothgar came forward and asked Beowulf to kneel. He then took out his own family heirloom, a sword called Naegling. He blessed Beowulf with it, and then placed it in Beowulf's hands, saying, "Beowulf, you have shown your true worth. Words cannot express my gratitude that you have come to save us in this our hour of need. Take this sword, and may it defend you for many years. But I say this before you leave us, Beowulf. Beware, for though you have won this victory in a just and noble way, you must not let the pride of this victory go to your head. You must always remember that your place is to serve your people, to keep the peace, to make sure they feel loved and honored by you, not just in how you feel about them, but in what you give to them. Be generous always, so that they know that their Lord loves and protects them. And beware too, Beowulf, that though you may see many years of peace and plenty, as I have done, you never know what life will bring, and what dangers lie ahead. Again, Beowulf, I say, thank you, and farewell." And so Beowulf and his brave warriors returned to Geatland, and just as Hrothgar said, Beowulf did live in peace for many years, but a time came when the peace was broken once more. But that is the next episode. I hope you enjoyed our story today. If you want more, just subscribe to our YouTube channel or our blog. And if you'd like to draw or paint a picture to go with the story, we'd love to put it on the video or on the website. So please share it with us by taking a photo and sending it to treehousetheatre.com, or you can share it with us on our Facebook page. So until next time, cheerio!
Tales from the Treehouse.